there is a moment in which you describe that crucial hour in the president's day, what people in Washington call the PDB, the Presidential Daily Briefing, when he gets a lot of information from his top intelligence officials. You write here, Russia-related intelligence that might draw the president's ire is in some cases included only in the written assessment and not raised orally, according to a former senior intelligence official familiar with the matter. In other cases, the president's main briefer, a veteran CIA analyst, adjusts the order of his presentation and text, aiming to soften the impact. Quote, if you talk about Russia, meddling, interference, that takes the PDB off the rails, according to a second former senior U.S. intelligence official. Phil, talk about the implications of this, that the president's own team is adjusting how they communicate to him on some of the nation's most sensitive issues because of the Russia investigation and the president's, as you call it, willful denial.
Yeah, well, Hallie, the sensitivity is certainly there in the classified briefings that the president receives from intelligence officials, but it's also there in his broader discussions with other national security advisors and other figures in the government. There's a real reluctance to engage with him directly on issues related to Russian interference, in large part because the president, and this goes all the way back to a year ago, has been so skeptical of the intelligence community's conclusion that, in fact, Russia did meddle, did interfere in the 2016 election with the aim of helping him win that election. He has not believed that intelligence. He has only occasionally publicly admitted to some of it, but only grudgingly so at the pleas of his aides. And in one instance, when he did, he actually regretted having said it, according to his aides. And so there's a real sensitivity with the president. Some of it is a human reaction. He feels like acknowledging this interference somehow delegitimizes his electoral win, which, as you and I know, he's very proud of. He's proud of all those electoral votes that he won around the country. And he just feels like it's a swipe against him.
So then, given all of that, Phil, is it a done deal for the president's top advisors, for his aides, for folks in the White House, that he will just never accept any conclusion that Russia interfered?
I don't know that I would call it a done deal. There actually is some work being done at the staff level within the government, in particular at the National Security Council, among the staff, also at the State Department, other parts of the government, to deal with this issue credibly, to try to come up with some options for the U.S. to safeguard the electoral systems and protect in the future, but it's not reached the presidential level. According to our reporting, there has been no cabinet meeting on this subject. There's been no sort of broader National Security Council meeting convened by the president to address the threat of Russian interference.
Jonathan Lemire, put this into perspective for us here. In past instances when, for example, there has been a national security threat to the U.S. democracy, and based on Phil's reporting, what the Washington Post is saying here, the president sort of refusing to accept it, and not just that, but his advisors kind of watching their language around the president because of that.
It's extraordinary, and an argument could be made dangerous. The president's top priority, any president's top priority, is to safeguard the American people, their physical safety, of course, but also the safety of our most cherished institutions in our democracy. Chief among them are elections. And it seems that this president has a willful blind spot for this issue. I think you guys hit the nail on the head a moment ago. We know how proud he is of this election.
Yeah.
We know that he is very sensitive to any suggestion it may be illegitimate. We know that it bugs him tremendously. He's told people around him that he didn't win the popular vote, and that he has suggested even that there was widespread voter fraud that cost him that. Of course, there's no proof of any of that fraud. And he believes that suggestion that the Russians interfere with this election, that they tampered with it, that they attempted to influence people to support him, undermines his credibility, his legitimacy as being president, and therefore he's willing to just let this be and not doing anything to perhaps prevent it from happening again.
So I was at a press conference at Trump Tower way back at the end of the transition, beginning of the administration, right before inauguration, guys, when the president was asked, obviously, about Russia. This is what he had to say, just to refresh your memories.
As far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people.
That was as close as he got to essentially pinning the blame for election interference on Moscow. But as Phil, as you report, he almost immediately regretted those words. He turned around to aides and said, it's not me, it wasn't right. And to me, I wonder if that's not a significant moment for this president when he realized what we have seen every single day this administration, which is he's not going to back down from anything. He's not going to make concessions on anything, even something of this magnitude.
That's right. It was a significant moment, and that press conference came after the intelligence chiefs went up to Trump Tower about 5 days earlier to brief the president-elect on the intelligence community's conclusion about Russian interference. And in that interim period, some of the president-elect's political advisors, Reince Priebus, Jared Kushner among them, impressed upon him in a series of conversations how important it was for him to publicly acknowledge those intelligence findings, get this issue off his chest, and move on. It was so important to President Trump early on to have this warm relationship with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. He wanted to get along with Russia. He thought Russia was the key to solving problems like North Korea and Iran. And so he was so reluctant to embrace this intelligence, and his advisors were pleading with him to do it. He finally did it, grudgingly so, and then he regretted it after the fact.
I want to get Keir Simmons. Keir, you were at the president's press conference. You've been in Russia covering President Putin's press conference there, in which he was talking about these allegations of collusion with Russia. There was an interesting point made by Andrew Weiss in the Washington Post. Quote, Putin has to believe this was the most successful intelligence operation in the history of Russian or Soviet intelligence. And I wonder what your reaction is to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure it really was necessarily that successful. I think that it's easy to kind of, pose President Putin as this sophisticated political operator, but it's just as easy to argue that intervention has actually backfired on Russia, leading to sanctions. Many of the questions that President Putin faced in that news conference was about the domestic economy and the issues they're facing. I mean, Hallie, it's become so normal that it's almost seems irrelevant to point out, but just once again, you see the president of Russia and the president of the United States echoing each other. President Putin today describing those allegations of meddling in the election as delirium, as madness, supporting President Trump's record, saying that the markets are going up because of trust in President Trump. So the two of them don't need to be colluding, but they are listening to each other, and so far they seem to be in pretty close lockstep, if you like. Although President Putin did say one thing that I thought was interesting. He said, I hope that President Trump still believes in a closer relationship with Russia. And I wondered if that was a little bit of telegraphing to the White House to say to the President of the United States, stay with me.